Oh, hello. Hi. Sorry. I didn't notice you there because I was just trying to survive the coldest June in Los Angeles in history over here. Sorry. I am all bundled up today to bring you Everything's Relative, the podcast where we explore all the effects of DNA testing and secrets and the way that truth comes spilling out about families when science cannot be denied. I'm Eve Sturgis. I experienced what's called an NPE, a non-paternal event, when I found out the man who raised me is not my biological father. More importantly, I found out there are a lot of people like me. I wanted to spread the word as fast as I could about this phenomenon, which is so furiously driven in the past few years, especially by direct-to-consumer DNA tests. And I want us to talk about it. So I started a podcast. Honestly, not sure that is really the fastest way to spread the news of a phenomenon, but here we are, still plugging away at it, reaching people near and far, in hot weather, in cold weather. Maybe it's warm where you are. Maybe by the time this episode launches, it will be warmer in Los Angeles. But let me tell you, I do not have the constitution for this overcast, gray, and rainy experience in June. You know what makes me, this makes me think about, what I'm trying to say is, I think what I'm about to say makes me sound like a real simpleton, but one thing that I have really grown to love about the weekly writing group that I host here is our check-in about the weather. So on Thursdays, we work with the process journal called Who Even Am I Anymore? And people use Zoom to join in from all over the country. I am really amazed at the way that our bodies exist in all different environments and habitats while our minds are sharing the same space. Like, I'll feel really cold and someone else will describe their day as hot and muggy. I think it's possible that I sound like an alien who's just landed on Earth. Or maybe like I've just done a lot of pot, smoked a lot of weed. But let's just say that again. How did I say it? I'm really amazed at the way our bodies exist in all different environments while our minds share the same space. But it's the truth. It is amazing to me. I feel like I'm learning more about our Earth because we talk about the weather on Thursdays. If you are interested in processing your own DNA surprise using my process journal, reach out. It's available on Amazon and on my website, and we meet on Thursdays on Zoom if you're thinking that you'd like a little more structure and community. So check it out. Today, I'm talking with Cairelle Crowe, author of the book, The Magic in Your Genes. This season is really book heavy. I don't know how that happened, but it's so exciting how many resources are becoming available to our community. Cairelle Crowe has walked a goddess path for more than 30 years, exploring, learning, and growing. She has been involved in genealogical pursuits since the late 1990s and began to actively work with genetic genealogy in 2013. She is the owner of Sacred Roots, which is dedicated to connecting people to their ancestral heritage and legacy, and she lectures locally, nationally, and internationally on the blending of genealogy with magic. She's also an integrative RN and menopause advocate who facilitates sacred experiences for midlife women. When she's not riding on a Mardi Gras float in her native New Orleans or roaming the world in search of grandmothers and stone circles, Cairelle is at home at the Shenandoah Valley, where she lives joyfully, loves intensely, and laughs frequently with beloved family and friends. Okay, so every time I point to you, you say something cool, okay? Hey, Dallas, do you want to make a podcast?
Yeah, sure.
Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money.
Wow, that's awesome.
All in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters. And here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters.
I don't know how it works.
It's okay. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer. So no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today.
Cool. Can we set it up now?
Yeah, and then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard.
Awesome.
Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch.
Wow, I'll download it right now.
Ever since I discovered Spotify for podcasters, food tastes better, wine tastes sweeter, and I'm a better mother to Dallas. Isn't that true?
Yep.
I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Hello.
There you are. Hi.
Hey.
The magic is in your genes.
The magic in your jeans,
The
yeah.
magic in your
Which
genes.
the publisher, that was not my title that I picked. I
Oh,
picked,
really?
no, I picked Genealogy Magic. It was very
Oh.
simple to me. They said
Uh-huh.
it sounded like a textbook. I was like, I know no textbook with that title, and then when they came up with the magic in your jeans, I was like, the whole double entendre there. I'm already sick of hearing about it. And I told them, I said, it's going to be a thing. But it's kind of funny. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
People get great amusement out of it. I'm like, whatever. Look, just, this book was a labor of love.
Right.
So, and it's, yeah, it's,
It gives you a story anyway, right?
it
And
does.
and the
Apparently
most
somebody had some magic somewhere because that's how we all got here, right?
right, that's how it all happened.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you are a genealogist,
Yes.
right? And how did you get into that?
Um, well, the shortest answer would be my grandmother. So when I was in sixth grade, I think, I came home and I told her about a boy that I liked. And he was just so cute. His name was Steven. And she, I said his last name and she said, who's his grandmother? And I was like, I don't know. We lived in a small town in
Yeah.
southeastern Louisiana, right
But
outside of New
still,
Orleans.
what a question. Even
Yeah. So I was like, okay, I'll go to school and ask. So I go to school and ask him, like, who's your grandma? And he's like, I don't know. He didn't know her name. So he
Mhm.
went home, asked his mom, came back. Anyway, long story short, I go home, I tell my grandmother his grandmother's name, and she said, you can't like him because he's your cousin. And she recognized the last name. And I was like, that's not my cousin. I knew all of my first cousins. I have
Right.
a huge family. And I was like, no, he's not. So she sat down and drew me a tray and about how she went back, he's the grandmothers, and I think it ended up we were like third cousins or something like that. But third or fourth cousins, not terribly close, but close enough for her to know the name. And I was fascinated by that.
That's fat. I mean, gosh, almost if everybody could get a cool experience like that.
My brain exploded. It just exploded because I was like, how many people are we related to? And then I was like, everybody. And my brain just like grew this big web in my head. And I was just so taken with drawing out our family tree. And I was just not even barely a preteen. And then fast forward and I, married young and my husband is adopted. And I was 17 when we had our daughter. And I realized that the first time he held her, was the first time he had ever seen anyone who was genetically related to him.
Hmm.
Even at that young age, I recognized that he was surrounded by people that like he was different than me. Like I looked like my mom. I, had mannerisms like her brother. And, she says, I have my dad's mouth. So you have all this mirroring that goes on that's super important for kids growing up. And I realized that even at that young age, no, because what do you know when you're 17? Everything, right? And nothing.
Right. Right.
Right.
Right.
So
Depends on who you're asking.
it does. And even then I recognize the importance of, again, those connections. And so, over the years, I spent time with my mom's brother. We researched my tree on my maternal side. I was kind of really disconnected from my dad's side because he lived in another state. Um, and we were told family stories and just over the years, this evolvement, like all genealogists do, you evolve, and then DNA came along and so I tested my husband because I was like, let's find out who you are, right? So this was in 2006, back when National Geographic had their genographic project that they just started, and they told us he was Northern European, and I was like, okay, so you're a white guy.
Yeah, really.
That's
That's
yeah.
really helpful. We could have
But
gotten
it
that.
was it
Yeah.
was interesting, and I didn't realize at the time, when it passed over to family tree DNA and it converted itself into a Y12, and and then I I guess around 2000, sometime in 2013, I realized again that all this DNA testing was going on, how much it had evolved.
Hmm.
And so I tested him at 23andMe because I wanted to see what his health history was. We had, two daughters and two grandsons by this time. So, and it turns out he's a carrier for cystic fibrosis.
Well, heads
Yeah, and I
up.
was like, and I've been a registered nurse for a long time before the work critical care for years, very intimately familiar with the struggles that those patients can go through, especially back in those days when they didn't have the advances that they do now, which are amazing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Even in my time.
Yeah, absolutely. So we did more testing, and long story short, I used DNA to find his birth mother, and I was hooked, just hooked. And I realized I could just see this like a puzzle sliding around in my head, how these things connected, and the way that we found him, his mother was a little complicated because it involved court records and you know lies and stories and weird last names and all these little pieces fit
Hmm.
together. But
Hmm.
we got what we needed. So it was just this so I was like, well, this is fascinating. I want to do, and the ethnicity estimate really fascinated me, of course, like it does everybody, right? It's just like this little dangly prize that they hang over you because that's what people want to see, right?
Right. It's so often
Um,
the impetus.
I did mine and it was interesting. And then I did it at Ancestry and it kind of exploded. And, I noticed that, well, I don't know how deep you want me to go into my story.
All of it. I want all of it.
When I got my DNA results back, of course, it was 23andMe, not a huge database at the time. And so I'm from southeastern Louisiana on my mother's side, which is a lot of people charge extra to do genealogy in this area because of the endogamy. So
Right. Well, endogamy, just a rich and complicated history.
it is. Yeah. So I mean, I'm probably related to I'm probably my own cousin, right? So
Sure.
right. So, I didn't see as many of the last names that I thought I would see but I chalked it up to my dad being he was born in Washington, D.C. and his Pennsylvania roots. It's like, well, I'm kind of a half C when it comes to being from southeastern Louisiana. So it's like, whatever. Then my mom decided she wanted to test hers. She's, New Orleans and French and we have this rich French history, Acadian and France and just this wonderful tapestry that her brother had researched for many years. And then I came along as growing up and I would help him do that. And we had a lot of, he had traveled to France and she'd gone there and, ancestral homes and this whole big story. So she wanted to see, well, she decided to test at 23andMe. And back then, I don't know if it's still that way now, but you could add an account to the primary account and everybody had the same login and you could switch profiles. So I just added hers onto mine, right? And I'm like, here, we're just going to do this. And when the DNA results come in, we can log in together and look at it. Well, I was sitting in a parking lot. My husband was doing some certification testing for credentialing for his job. And the email popped up that her results were in. And I was like, oh, cool. Let me go looking. And the first person at the top, and I hadn't logged in for a little while. It wasn't a daily login thing like I still do now. And the first person I knew was my first cousin was her highest match. And I was like, oh, he must have just tested too, right? So whatever. So my mom has five older brothers. Okay. And the oldest one was deceased, and that was my Jacob's dad, my cousin's dad. Then I noticed that his percentage was low as a match to her. And I was like, why?
Oh God.
That's odd. Yeah. I was like, that's so weird. And I was like, and I'm looking online. And I'm like, my husband got in the car and I'm like, I'm still real new to this, right? Like, help me with the math. Okay. So we're 50% and we're going down. And long story short, with her, he could not match her and his father and my mother be full siblings. So I got home and she logged into the account all the time too. She knew the test was coming in any day. So, because I've gotten a lot of grief for having the conversation with her
Oh.
and telling her, but she's not stupid,
Mhm.
right? And what would she think if I kept something like that from her, right? She would have figured it out eventually on her own. So, called her. I said, the results are a little odd, Mom. I said, he doesn't match you like he should. It's only a half relationship. And she said, well, what does that mean? I said, well, it means that either you or your brother are not the child of one of your parents, probably father, mother, because mom's is usually not the case with,
Not
but
usually.
it does happen. So I said, but we don't know for sure. It's probably grandpa, but I don't know. And she said, you've got to be wrong. She said, you don't know enough about this. You've got to be wrong. So I
Hmm.
was Facebook friends with a very prominent genetic genealogist back before she got very, very big and popular. And I messaged her and I said, and I gave her the results, and she's like, that's a half sibling. That indicates a
Yeah.
half sibling relationship.
Oh, your poor mom not wanting it to be true.
So I was like, okay, well, how are we didn't know which one it was because this brother is deceased.
Right.
So I said, okay, well, there's two brothers left. We're going to test those two brothers, and then we're going to test a maternal cousin to rule in or out which parent, right? Makes sense. So we're going to
This is
cover,
tracking. Yeah.
yeah. So we did not tell anybody. We told them we asked them if they were interested in testing for, the family project, because I think maybe if they had known, they might not have tested, which seems kind of disingenuous now looking back. But my mom she was very fragile at this point, kind
Hmm.
of. So tested the two brothers, tested the cousin. They all came back, matched the maternal cousin at the same. So they shared the same mother. The two brothers matched each other as full siblings. They matched the nephew, my cousin, as full uncles, and both matched my mother as half siblings. So
Oh,
my mom was the child that was not the daughter of the man she called dad.
right. Oh,
And let me tell, I still get teared when I think about it.
yeah.
Making that phone call, I called her and I said the results are back, and she was quiet. She said, "It's me, isn't it?" And
Oh,
I said, "Yes, it is." And she was quiet, and she said, "I have to go." I did not hear from her for 3 days. I couldn't get her on the phone.
oh,
I knew she was alive because her neighbors told me she was. I could see her moving around in there. She was absolutely destroyed. And there was nobody alive left for her to ask. She was 64 years old
hmm.
when she found out that her daddy wasn't her biological father, and it just destroyed her. She was so, I can't, the pain that she experienced is so, and I was so angry. And I was like, what, what is, you hear about these things, but your family, right? Of course, you know your family. I've had so many people tell me, oh, that would never happen in my family. So many people presume that because you look like somebody that they have to be a full sibling or that has to be your dad. Everyone thought he was my grandpa because I have his big round head.
Right.
Oh, you have your grandpa's head. Well, apparently not. I've got somebody else's big round head.
Apparently there's more than one big round head out
I got
there.
this bowling ball from somebody else. So,
Oh, your mom.
yeah.
I didn't know. I come into these interviews often not really knowing what's going on. I thought beyond you were a genealogist. We're going to talk about your book.
Mhm.
And I really was curious about where you sort of got the genealogy bug, but I did not.
I'm not done yet.
Oh God,
Okay.
yes.
So,
That
meanwhile,
part already hurts.
that's just part one, and I'll make it quick. But
I'm letting go.
meanwhile,
I'm just letting go of all your French ancestry. And
yes. Well,
Mhm.
she jokes now a little bit. She said, I came into the world a little French girl and I'm going to die an old Italian woman.
All right. Okay. Well,
That's what she says now.
that's a good attitude to have.
It's been solved. But
Mm.
so meanwhile, when I tested my mom, then I was like, I want to test my dad too. Well, he was resistant. He's very suspicious sort.
Well, after watching that, who the heck would want to
Well, he didn't
do?
know this. This was at the same time. Like, so I
Oh, okay.
tested them about 6 weeks apart. So I sent him test, he swabbed, his results come in. Well, by that time, I was involved with my mother's results, right? And I looked at his cursory glance and I was like, it's weird. There were cousins on there that I thought I was going to see, but whatever. I didn't really think about it, So I got my mom's, we kind of came up with a plan. She didn't want me to look for anybody. And I said, well, I'm going to quietly search because I know that she's going to want to know. She's just not there yet. So I didn't talk to anybody about it. I didn't reach out to any matches or anything like that. I just started digging. And then I started looking at my dad's results and I was like, what on earth? I'm like, there's cousins. And I was like, so I called up my cousin, Melody, and I said, hey, will you take a DNA test for me? Now, her mom and my dad are supposed to be full siblings.
Hmm.
So she said, sure, and I,
That's called foreshadowing.
yeah. So yeah, the, the meanwhile, my dad got really sick. The DNA results came back. He said, did you find out what you wanted to know? I was like, oh yeah, I'm your daughter, haha. And he was like, well, I knew that. And I was like, anyway. So he but then he went in for a diagnostic test, and he coded during the test. He was critically ill and he died soon after that.
Oh,
So I'm sitting with because I had talked with my sister and I was like, there's something going on with dad's DNA results. I'm not seeing the matches that I'm supposed to see.
and they are like, Cairelle will not stop meddling with everybody's.
My husband calls me a genealogical agent of chaos. That's what he calls me.
Yeah. Oh
So,
boy.
so I'm like, so, all this is kind of like this little pieces are sliding around together or, around. And so he dies. My sister and I had already decided I was going to kind of dig into it a little bit before I mentioned it to him. So he never knew, right? He never knew that, anything. So I test my cousin. Long story short, she had the match. Now, her mother is also deceased. She had the matches to the cousins on the paternal side and matched all of them. I did not. We are half cousins. My father is also not the child of the man he thought was his father. So I have my parents are both NPs.
Wow.
And I was just like, are you serious? Like when I like figured that my cousin's results came back, I was just, I like cackled like a crazy hyena. It's just like that weird crying, laughing thing that you get. I'm like,
Because what else would you
I
do?
don't know. I'm like, okay, so let me get this straight. I'm like, okay, so, and to complicate it even more, so I always looked about surnames, right? My dad carried the surname of his stepfather because his mom and father divorced when he was young. So my maiden surname was my step grandfather's. My dad, but even the surname that he had before was not his. My mom's surname, not hers. My husband's surname, not his. So I've got all these people around me with all these disconnected familial lines. And it was just, it was just mind blowing. I was like, okay, well, let me dive in.
That sounds, I mean, I don't always say this, and I suppose someone could say, yeah, that just sounds chaotic, but it also sounds really cosmic.
Doesn't it? You know?
It does. Like there's something about you being in the middle of all these broken lines that feels meant to be in some.
Yeah. So, that was part of the thing. I think that because everyone's like, oh, you need to write your story. But a big aspect of this was dealing with the spiritual side of it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a mainstream Christian person. I'm a pagan, and these family ties are really important to me. I guess as when you kind of get attached to these stories that you're told and
Mm-hmm.
these things that you discover on paper. And basically, I mean, I tell anybody, take a look at your big, beautiful tree and chop off your grandfather's. What does it look like?
Mm-hmm.
You know, Mine looked like crap. I was just like, I thought about it and I was like, wait, that means I lose all of those ancestors and their stories. You know, I just, it was something. It was something. So, and I was angry. I was angry at for my mother's pain.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't quite as painful for me because I'm a generation down. It wasn't my dad, but it's my grandpa. And it was her. She was embarrassed. And she said she felt like a dirty secret. So when it took me about 18 months to figure it out, I did solve hers in 18 months, took me about 18 months. And when I said the name to her, she said it was like someone opened up a flood of memories. Um,
Wow.
and so she had met him. He was the brother of one of my grandmother's friends.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what happened. I don't know what the deal was. I mean, nobody's around anymore. It doesn't matter,
Right.
because it's she's here and it happened. Um, but she had met him, she was waitressing at a little restaurant on Carrollton Avenue in New Orleans, and he would come in with his cousin who it ended up being, well, she's related to all these people too. And they all knew my grandmother. They knew her, and she just knew him as some kind older man, But we were in there one day, and he came over, and he was like, "Oh," he's like, I was never able to have children." He said, "But I'd take these two in a heartbeat." And she didn't realize that she was talking with her father.
Oh my
And he
gosh.
knew who she was, and he knew we were his grandchildren. She truly believes that. And she
Mm-hmm.
just thought he was just a nice older man who was hanging out with, he was the cousin of another one of the friend of my grandma's that she knew better, and she's like all these little things that let her know now that her family knew, you know, my grandmother's sisters, of course her sisters knew. And of course her grandmother knew, and all these things. And it was really painful for her. She felt like she had been conned,
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
and she felt like, what did I miss out on?
Sure.
What did I miss out on? What would my dad, she called him daddy, what would daddy have done to me had he discovered that I wasn't his daughter? And that wasn't a good thought process for her either, because I don't think it would have been pretty.
Mm.
And, he was just all these little things that had kind of built up for her. So everybody's died. This man had one sister alive. She's in her 90s. And slowly I have a way of cultivating, relationships and whatnot, on a just take it takes time. People just have to sit with you for a while and
Mm-hmm.
realize that you're not some crazy, window scratching stalker, right? So,
Right. You don't have to sell
but
something. Yeah.
yeah, so cousin match came up, and it was turns out he's my second cousin on that side of the family, and we had a phone call, and he was like, "Oh, that's Aunt Lucy. I know, his mom and my mom were first cousins, and we met his mom, and so she met her first cousin on her paternal side, and but the aunt would have nothing to do with her. But
Oh.
she knew my grandmother and did not like her.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Of course, I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, what old lady BS is this?
Right.
That's what it was. It's just, that's what it is. And, but when the cousin saw my mother and me, she gasped because I looked just like my mother. And she said, "You both look just like my grandmother."
Hmm.
And so, of course, naturally, we want to see a picture, and none yet has been forthcoming. No, not
Really?
even a photo. We have no idea.
Oh.
No idea. I
Hmm.
have reached out to first cousins and second cousins, and newspapers and whatever, and I have yet to get any. Now we have one picture of her father, and I can see the build and the hands, and I can see it. As soon as I saw it, I was like, "Oh my gosh, looks like my mom." I can see shades of her and me in more distant relatives, but she's been denied that photo, and it has hurt
Hmm.
her terribly.
Oh.
It has hurt her
I,
terribly.
the elusiveness of one photo.
Right.
Hmm.
And I always want to ask people, what are you afraid of? How does it hurt you? She's not after money. She doesn't want to call anybody daddy. She doesn't want to be, she wants to see a photo. She has a daddy, right? She
Right.
has her dad. He's always going to be her dad, but she would like to see a photo. So that is not forthcoming yet.
Mm.
It's been 9 years since this happened, and she's mellowed out a little bit. I think it hurts a tiny bit less, but our family, so her two brothers, and we told them what was going on, and everybody was just aghast and just shocked. They were like, "That is not possible."
Hmm.
And I'm like, "This is absolutely the way that it is." And so everybody was just, and she's I don't know. She's just, it really hurt her. I think it's affected her physical health. It's
Mm.
affected, of course, her mental health. And, of course, now with nobody around, there's no one to ask. Her brothers have since died. She's the only sibling left. All the old aunts are gone, of course, my grandmother, so
Hmm.
all the people that would know have been gone. And so she just has she has a name, and that's it. And so it's there's no relief I guess.
Yeah, it's like own category of pain for the all the people that have no
Yeah.
answers. They just cannot have any answers. And it's so
Right.
often a timing and age and generation
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So,
mm,
it's something. So, and then with my dad, he was hard. It took me 5 years,
oh,
because I started with him with one 60 Morgan match.
oh,
That's what I had.
that's nothing. It's for
Yeah,
anybody who doesn't know about Centimorgans, that's nothing. That's like a grain of sand.
it is. And I couldn't figure out why he had no matches. And
Mm,
still, my paternal matches to this day are still, but over the years, it's evolved. And so I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to work with small matches. And I started out with this 60 Centimorgan Morgan match, and I got ahead another one. And I, started building out the trees of these people.
man, bless you. Woo!
Yeah, well,
Yeah, 60 Centimorgans.
it wasn't easy, let me tell you. So, but I kept noting everybody had the same roots back to Ohio into a particular
Mm,
family. And I was like, okay, so that's the source, right? Of at least one side for
mm,
him. That's the source. But it was just so odd. And my mom's like, well, he was born during World War II. My grandmother was a civilian employee for the Navy Department in Washington, D.C. Hello, she was, I mean, it was 1943, 44. He was born in 44.
mhm.
So we're thinking military guy, but she said maybe he's from another country. And I was like, maybe. I was like, but there's definitely a USA component here in Ohio. I know I can see it. I can see it in these matches. Well, of course, time moves on and you start to get more and more matches. Well, eventually I had compiled a massive tree of a family group in Ohio. And I mean, it took me forever, built it down, all the lines coming down. And I had certain hypotheses based on matches, but it was hard because I only had him in family tree DNA. I wasn't able to, so I could upload him, of course. My heritage was not around in the earliest days, or they were, but they were having algorithm problems with their matching and they weren't accurate.
Mm,
But I couldn't do him at Ancestry. I couldn't do him at 23andMe, right? He was on
right.
GEDmatch, of course. So I tested me. I have, my sister and two of my sisters and two of my brothers. There's six of us total. My father has six children. I was tested myself and four others. The last one was like, absolutely not. He wasn't interested. He's like, nope, not doing
Like
it.
I
And
am
I
not
was like,
interested in this mess that
yeah,
you have created.
they were very helpful because one of my brothers seemed to have a much higher match to a lot of these people than the rest of us did. So I guess he had gotten that chunk, that paternal chunk, whatever, which was super helpful. I mean, it was crazy how much these matches would vary among the five of us, right?
Hmm.
So I've slowly, between the five of us, built out this massive tree. And I had these hypotheses, and I was at my wit's end. I was like, I just don't know where else to go. And my heritage, he had a match at my heritage, but that's again, the algorithm was off. And so I reached out to Leah Larkin. I don't know if you know who she is. She is the DNA geek.
Yes, yes.
She has a blog, Leah La Pearl Larkin. Well, anyway, she with Johnny Pearl and others had come up with the shared Sunny Morgan, the DNA painter. And I reached out to her. She said, well, we're working on this thing. She said, just send me all your information. I'm going to use him as because he's very difficult. She
Hmm.
said, I'm going to use him. So she ran all the hypotheses that I had, and the odds came up, and it pointed to one line for a guy named John Cairelle or his brother James. We don't know. And what was interesting in this tree is that the reason, this is what makes me feel even so. And long story short, his father is one of two brothers. That's as far as I've been able to get.
That's
I
yeah.
think it's the one that was in the military. That would make sense.
Hmm.
So
That
that's
would
the
be
one I
right.
use, but
Wow.
it technically could be the other one, but
Right.
neither one had any other children. In
Hmm.
the generation before that, only one brother had those two sons. In the generation before that, only one person had children. So there were no siblings, no first cousins, and no second cousins on his male line.
Wow.
And I was like, well, that's shifty, right? How can I be
Everybody's
sure?
keeping things real close. Yeah.
Right. So, but what, and that was the Irish side.
Even weirder.
Yeah,
I mean, to
right.
have
Which
no
is
children is what I.
right. So there were children, but only one child in each generation ended up having children. So there were multiple
Right,
children,
right.
but only one went down. So he had a match with on the it would be his paternal grandmother's side. He matched high enough as a third cousin. And since then, and it was enough to place him in this line. It was
Mm-hmm.
tenuous. It wasn't really firm for me, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it was enough that it was like, it really couldn't be too much else, but it didn't feel great. So, but I sat with that for a few years and eventually, so when he died, I had his sample at Family Tree DNA. I immediately had called him and I said, I need this sent off to upgrade to Y, max it. Because that was all I had, right? There was no more. I mean, I could have done one of my brothers, but it was just better with him. And
Mm-hmm.
eventually a cousin reached out that he matched and her brother did a Y-DNA test and they are an exact match at 111 at Y111. It's same surname. So she's also trying, we haven't figured out through autosomal DNA how these two lines connect yet. There's not a lot of documentation, which is really odd. It's
Mm.
Boston, it's Philadelphia. There's like a Boston Philadelphia connection. And let me tell you the name James Cairelle
Yeah,
in
not
that area.
in the
Hello,
Irish. Hello, like you're never
you
gonna
know,
find
right. So, I mean,
needle in a haystack. Yeah.
yeah. So it's just really, I uncovered so many interesting stories like his great grandmother and great uncle that lived together in Pennsylvania and they got the flu and it was all these newspaper articles about how the sun came in and had to put them in a sleigh and they went through this big snowstorm and anyway they died on the same day in 1920. So of course I'm finding all these news articles and I'm only able to glean so much information. So it's kind of been a big brick wall for me that I've set aside for now because I
Mm-hmm.
just mentally I have to take a step back because the information just got to be too overwhelming. But we have enough in now that I feel confident that his father was one of these two brothers,
Mm-hmm.
which is good. I don't need to know which one. The surname is the same and they have this, whatever. So in and amongst these wanderings of mine and testing different people, I found another cousin who found out her dad wasn't her dad. And I'd worked on that. And then my grandson's other grandmother is an adoptee and
Mm-hmm.
worked on her. Hers was also an endogamy slash complicated kind of thing, but found hers. And so I've just over the years have realized I'm really good at putting these little puzzle pieces together. It's fun. It's fun for me. I'm like, ooh, what you got?
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Yeah.
kind of like it's like a challenge almost. And so, but I tell people all the time, I'm like, look, don't be smug. Don't be smug. I have a very dear friend
Mm.
she shared her DNA results with me and we were, we're actually going on a trip later this summer over to England and Scotland. She said, who was that ancestor of mine that's from some place in Wales? I don't know, Wales or something. I'm like, let me go look at your tree. I can't remember who it was. And because her daughter has this beautiful tree done up. And I noticed on her matches, I said, yes, I know you have new matches. And she's like, I'm like, who's this? And she was like, I don't know who that is. And I'm like, well, do you need to know who this? She's like, it says cousin. And I was like, what have I told you? Do not look at the label. You have to look at
Mm.
the number. I said, that number indicates the fact that you don't know who this person is, means that this is a mystery. And she told me she was one of those people who's just been like, well, that doesn't happen in my tree.
Mm-hmm. Not in my family. Yeah.
It looks like her, so there's some interesting things there. But people do that all the time. They're like, I don't know who that is. And I'm like, you should know who that is.
For some reason, sometimes when I think about doing a family tree or tracing my own genealogy, um, two things. One is I still don't quite understand how it all works. And when I look at my I'm an NPE, and when I look at my list that comes up, what comes up on 23andMe and Ancestry, it's 99% names I don't know, I don't recognize. And I'm really thrilled that since I've started the podcast, I've had a cousin to it. So, I mean, like a first cousin that I know really well. So his name comes up now, and I'm always like, hey, what's up? But everyone else, is strangers. And so that's sort of over. I don't know where to start. That's a part of it. And it sounds kind of academic to me when people describe it. Often, not always. You describing it to me today sounds fascinating. And for some reason, you talking about tracing a line back to Ohio, I suddenly had a very clear visual of a map and a line, an actual line with a pen.
This is what I love about genealogy, right?
Collecting the stories.
Yes, that's exactly right.
That's all of a sudden I'm like, oh, not that I don't understand it. I know that different things interest people in different ways. But today I feel like the way you're describing it, I'm really feeling drawn to that kind of.
This is what I tell people. This is part of the premise of my book. So, like I said, I turned a lot to, I feel like I'm a magical person. The world is a magical place. Genealogy is amazing in the way that so when people build a tree, they get very possessive about it, right? This is my tree and that is your tree. But what they forget about is the structure of trees and how under the ground, trees are all connected and intertwined. And so are our family trees in one way or another. And for people, and I had to do this because I was really angry when this happened to my mom, right? I was angry for her. And most of us have a place in our homes where we set up pictures of people who are gone or loved ones, just a nice place where you can look at their picture and, that's a common thing, in a lot of people's homes. And I took all that down and I put my grandmother's in a box. And I was like, I do not want to look at you right now. I'm angry. I don't know why you did this. You lied and you hurt people that I love. And a very dear friend said, you need to take your grandmothers out of the box and put them back where they belong and ask them what happened, And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, and he said, make a cup of coffee, sit down with your grandmother's photo, drink some coffee, and you talk to her about how angry you are. And I did that. But, what struck me, I think after coming out of all of this is how much people who are hurting with their current living family can step past them and go into the stories of the ancestry and people from whom they descend, all who have a story, who have a lifetime, at least long enough to make a child, and where does that come from? What's the energy that sits in that line? What did these people do for a living? Where did they come from? How did they move across the country? How did they get here? And you get to tap into your heritage and your family story without having to sit in the stew that hurts so badly in your current living situation, your dynamics now. And so that is something that's accessible for anybody. If you're an NPE, lots of people are removed from the genetic / genealogical aspect of their family tree through several ways. They could be an NPE, they could be an adoptee, they could be a foster kid, they could be someone who has been removed from the family because of sexual orientation or who they're religious reasons, or because they married someone with another color of skin. So there's a lot of reasons why people are removed from that knowledge of their tree. And the thing about genetic testing, the genealogical genetic testing, is that it opens the door for everybody. So like you said, you have a list of names that you don't know when you look at that. But what you can do with that, I don't know how much work you've done in your own personal tree, is you can take those names. You don't have to talk to anybody, but you can plug them into different places. And eventually you're going to step past the people who are reachable in your living lifetime. And you can move back into these different lines. And what's the story that sits back there? And how can you bring that heritage forward into yourself in a way that makes you feel good? It all hurts. It hurts. It hurts a lot of people in a lot of different ways. But genealogy, and specifically genetic genealogy, allows you to step over that dung heap for lack of a better word,
Right.
because really
Yeah.
it's what it is. It's just a pile of BS, right? And some days you can't deal with your family, or these people who you're related to by blood. Maybe you don't want to have anything to do with them. Maybe they don't want to have anything to do with you. Maybe it's awkward. Maybe it's just not, it's like you can't just say, oh, you're my birth father. And so I'm supposed to have these amazing feelings for you suddenly. It doesn't work like that.
Mm-mm,
You can't just
mm-mm.
turn a switch and say, oh, hey, dad. That's a lifetime of, um, that's a lifetime relationship that's built from when you're small and you go forward or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And some people are able to create a bond, and that's great for them, but that's not what everybody can do.
It's not what everybody
It's
can do, and it's not automatic. Like sure, it
No,
can
it's
happen,
not.
absolutely, but it's
It's
not
really
automatic.
not.
Yeah.
I look at the struggle that my husband has had with his birth mother and the struggle that she's had. Her story was so sad,
Mm,
and it's not an automatic thing. I mean, he was raised and nurtured and loved by another woman. And,
mm-hmm,
that's been his mom for 50 years before we found her, his birth mother.
mm-hmm.
And even then, it's just a lot has been taken from people. A lot has been given to people in the way that they have these relationships with others who I call ancestors of influence. That's what I call them.
Yeah, tell me more about that.
So, we all come to so we all have different kinds of family, right? We have the three trees. We have our genealogical tree. Those are all the people that we descend from, right?
Mm-hmm.
Parents, grandparents, great grandparents, all the way back as far as you can figure out. So that's your genealogical tree. You have a genetic tree, which is a subset of the genealogical tree. So your you're going to have in your DNA a piece of your parents, a piece of your grandparents, whatever, back. But eventually you're going to get to a point where you have ancestors from whom you have not inherited any physical DNA because it's just been recombined out over the generations. You're still descended from them. Just that little piece didn't get to you. So that's your genetic tree. And then the third tree I call the tree of influence. And these are people in your life that are a sister, a friend's sister, or a person that was like maybe an uncle that was like a father,
Mm-hmm.
or a family friend who was like a mom, or it could be somebody that you admire so much that really played an important part in your life. And I tell this to a lot of people who have not had their own biological children. You still influence people. You think about a lot of the trauma that comes about in families, and how that trauma affects other people, and the way that all these things are spread around. And you have these influential people in your lives that help to settle you down and or to contribute something positive to your life. And that in turn, you turn around and you give this to your own family, and it's a healing that
Mm.
occurs there. So you say you come from a terrible family or all these things happened. Okay, well, that you can't change that, but what you can do is when you can change how you act towards other people, and you can change the things that you do with your own children. There's a saying that goes around: the best gift that you can give to your children is a broken chain. So what are you doing? You've got all this BS behind you. What are you doing to adjust that lineage and make it better? Because if you adjust it, going forward, then you can heal some of that ancestral trauma that
Mm.
comes along with you, because we all have it. But these people are people that sit in this tree. Let's say, you have two gay men that are married, and one of them has a biological child, but of course, it's not going to be the son of, the daughter of two men. Um, but this other parent is very influential in their life, so they get to sit on the tree. I know for me, my father was removed from my life at a very early age. We did not have a great relationship because he wasn't around. And when I was a little girl, I thought I watched Mr. Rogers,
Mm-hmm.
and I convinced myself that Fred Rogers was my father. I loved it. He was very kind. And he was, and of course, I'm like, okay, Fred Rogers is not your dad, So you
Probably
have a
not
problem.
Mr. Rogers, but
No.
wow. What wow of how many children probably gravitated towards
Yeah.
that
So,
idea. Yeah.
yeah. And so, yes, Fred Rogers has his own children. And of course, he's their ancestor, but he is an ancestor of influence for so many children who took his lessons to heart and who felt cherished and special because he said so. And that made a difference for me when I was a little girl. He was a very safe place for me in
Yeah,
a
I'm
very
about to cry about Mr. Rogers now.
yes, I cried when that man died. Do you hear
Yeah.
me? I cried bitter
Mhm.
tears when Mr. Rogers died.
Mhm.
And so, I have a best friend, well, she's known my children since they were little, and she is a huge part of my life and has gotten me through some tough times in my life and has influenced the dynamic that I have with my family in a positive way. And so, or you may have somebody that feels like a daughter to you or a son, and so these people get to hold a place on your tree as well as influential type people. So, I think that all of these things blended together create this really beautiful and rich and full, tree. So people who were adopted, for instance,
Mhm.
their whole tree when they start out is nothing but the people that influence them in
Right.
some way, whether it's good or bad,
Hmm.
and of course they have the other two trees, they're just not able to see them
Right.
right away. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no,
So,
I love that. I love the whole that holistic approach because it also gives people the opportunity to sort of acknowledge and love
mhm.
and embrace people regardless of
Yeah,
how they scientifically define family.
exactly. Because science is great and all. You can't, it always feels like, you're kind of chasing, you're kind of trying to outrun science sometimes. But there's a lot to be said for the science of psychology and how these things affect us physically. We all know stress produces hormones that have certain negative health effects, and children who are raised in circumstances that are more difficult they show this in physical manifestations later in the forms of diabetes and high blood pressure. And there's all kinds of research to show that non-genetic things can have an effect on your genes. I look at my mother, for instance, she thought her tree was one thing, and it turns out that her genetic and genealogical tree has shifted. And now the man that she thought was her father has flipped over to this ancestor of influence because that's the
Mhm.
man that raised her. And so he still gets to be a part of her story. And his own family story gets to be a part of her story because that's the man that raised her. And so it's still important. And I think it allows people that don't have the picture perfect circumstance of, or what society deems as such as the picture perfect circumstance of two parents, sibling, the 2.5 kids. There's all kinds of alternative type, well, not even I shouldn't say alternative. There's all kinds of families.
Mhm.
Families are built in many different ways. And, when people are together and if they're happy and they're flourishing in society, and then that deserves to have its own story written down. And so that was the whole thing with my book is that genealogy is for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm. Good
really is.
segue. That was what I was going to ask. I was going to
Yeah.
say, and how
So
did we
so
come from this
yeah.
into your book? How
Yeah.
did you
So,
get?
everyone's always telling me you should write a book, you should write a story about your mom and dad. And I'm like, yeah. So then I thought about my process and
Mm,
how I grew over the years since these discoveries and how much genealogy has affected the way that I live my life, and how important I think it is for people to understand that they do get to play a part in this, participating in their own genealogical story.
mm-hmm.
Just because you're adopted doesn't mean you don't have a story. So for people that are that feel set apart from genealogy, like my mom did, she's like, well, I don't have a dad anymore. And I'm like, of course you do. We just have
Mm-hmm.
to figure this out. So again, there's more than one kind of tree in the world. We've got tall, skinny trees, we've got short, fat trees, we've got trees that don't have many leaves on them, and
Yeah.
it's the same for everybody. Some people have a really beautiful full tree, and, sometimes something comes along and saws off one of those limbs like it did for you or for me and my parents, both of them chopped, and some people have bare trees with no leaves and they're just
Hmm.
waiting for something to come along so that it can sprout. So, all these trees need to be nourished. And it was just really important for me, when you step out of the politics and out of the the whole thing about it, people are people and they each have their own story.
Hmm.
And if genealogy tells the story of humanity, then it can't be a true story if it doesn't reflect the truth for every person that's in it. And every person is in it, whether you want them to be or not. Every single person has a genealogy story. And every
Hmm.
single person has their own unique circumstance. And you're the only one that knows your story. Who else can tell your story but you? I can't tell your story. I might know what I think are the facts of your story, but there's going to be a lot in there that I don't know about or that's not important to me that's really important to you. And so you have the right to tell your story in the way that you choose. And there's certain things we can't change. We can't change genetics. um it that's always going to be in that's always just going to be the facts of it. But how we flow through these genetics and in our lifetimes and the way that we interweave with other people and manifest this tapestry of interconnection, right? That's the story. So when you're sitting on this, in this weft and this warp of this, this quilt that humanity builds as time goes on, you get to sew your own piece, I guess is the way the
Mm.
way to say it. So, and that's what I wanted people to know, because I look at people like my husband and my mom, a cousin, and a friend whose father was adopted, and just all these stories that people have about these little chunks that are missing, and they all feel it in different ways.
Hmm.
And so genealogy is for them, and
Yeah.
it's for me, and it's for you, you know,
I
and
love
it's,
that, Carol. That's really
yeah,
beautiful. I'm not sure anyone has ever come on and talked about it in that way.
yeah. Well, it took me a long time to get there. Um, it can be a painful path, right?
Hmm.
It can be painful. Um, but I believe that everybody deserves to know their own truth.
Hmm.
Um, and I think there's ways for people to manage the pain that comes with that truth sometimes. You got to sit with it, right? You got to sit with it. I mean, it just is. And sometimes some people sit a little longer for than others,
Right.
But I always tell people, get in the pool, but get out and dry off, and sit
Hmm.
at the edge of the pool. I mean, the pool's, it's always there, but you can take this twist in your story and you get to do what you want with it, you know. I mean,
Hmm.
it's your story.
Yeah.
So it deserves to be heard. And um I'm a big believer. I think that in terms of adoptees and other things, access should be open. Birth certificates should be open. None of these laws were put into effect to shield birth mothers from their children. They were actually long ago were put into effect to shield children from their birth mothers and also to protect the families that adopted them from being embarrassed by the fact that they had to
Right.
adopt a child to make a family. People deserve to know who they are.
Absolutely.
And I think that genetic genealogy has really changed the focus of things, and it has really opened up the doors for people that didn't have answers before,
Hmm.
because they too get to take pride in their genetic heritage, or, you know, maybe they don't feel like they fit in where they are. I've heard that story so much from adoptees about how they were loved, and I'm not an adoptee, so I can't speak to the lived experience of an adoptee. I'm adoptee adjacent. That's how I put it. My husband has shared with me how he was very loved, but he always felt different,
Hmm. Yeah, you hear
and
it so much.
yeah, you don't have the mirroring of the physical looks or the mannerisms, and you don't, the family stories are there and they're very influential on
Right.
your life, but there's another story that sits within you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really important, that
Yeah.
legislation continues to move so that these documents are open and available. And also the adoption industry as a whole needs an overhaul.
Oh
So
yeah.
that's a whole sticky
Hmm.
thing. And that's, adoptees can speak more to that.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely.
So,
It's
but it's not great. I mean,
mhm.
there's rules in place about not taking puppies from
Right.
mama dogs for 6 to 8 weeks, but you'll chunk a newborn out. Then with my husband's case, the moment he was born, he
The
was pulled
moment,
away.
upon the moment.
The
Yep.
moment, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Lots of systems in place that really,
yeah,
deserve an overhaul, deserve a close look and
yeah,
a reconsideration about how they're run.
yeah.
For sure. Absolutely. Systemically. So remind everybody what the name of your book is. It's called.
The name of my book is called The Magic in Your Genes. And that's GENES.
Mhm.
And it's your personal path to ancestor work.
Oh,
And it's just a way it's very basic in terms of the science. I go into the different types of DNA, but it's definitely a very much a beginner's level book in terms of that. But it goes into the magical side of it, this, I guess, or the spiritual side of it, or the way that people might feel about making these connections, and how you can use your own personal spirituality or your own personal magic or your own personal way of being to access the information and the healing that can come from knowing more about where you come from.
I love
you
that.
know
Yeah,
yeah
I love it. This
and it's
is
just in a reminder too that you exist. Your existence is really, if you think about statistics and whatnot, just the fact that you're here it's a miracle,
mhm.
right? So you're here and you're, another day above ground is how I like to put it.
Right.
Still here,
Yeah.
And so, you get to explore these things, and maybe if part of you is broken in some way, you can heal it a little bit by stepping back in time
Hmm.
and look into the past, or writing your own story in the way that suits you, that's truthful. Now, that I will have to say, that I said people do get to write their own story, but it has to be based in truth.
Right.
And yeah, and standard genealogical ways of doing things.
Hmm.
Like, you can't make stuff up.
Right.
Let's not do that. Let's not make stuff
Right.
up. But
There are some.
there's beauty in every truth, right?
Mhm. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Yeah. I
Mhm.
love it. And people can get that book anywhere
Anywhere
they
books,
want.
yeah,
Yeah.
you can. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's anywhere. Yeah, just Google it. Yeah, and it'll pop up.
Great. Of course, it'll be on
Yeah.
my website. Everythingsrelativepodcast.com. I always have a listed towards the bottom. If you're scrolling down, it says something like books, the books from each podcast or something. And you click on it, it'll give you a nice Google sheet with all the links. This was just lovely. It was so nice to get to talk with you
Yeah, it's
and
fun.
learn more about this. Yeah. Yeah. I feel really inspired and interested to like reassess my own relationship with my family tree, think about it differently,
Yeah,
what to do about it.
go explore it.
Hmm.
Step over what's there. You don't have to know
Yeah.
anything about people, but you can move past that, and then
Yeah.
there's going to be stories there that you'll find fascinating.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Hmm.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, do it.
I'll be in touch with you about that, whether you want me to be or not.
Oh no, absolutely. Reach out for sure.
All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Wonderful.
Yeah.
This was so great.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thanks again to Cairelle for the time she spent with me. I loved this perspective on each person having multiple trees. And like the way that Cairelle described having ancestors of influence. I felt like as she was describing it to me, like my heart and my mind was softening. I love the concept of challenging sort of like the rigidity of scientific genetics and the traditional tree model. Maybe you've been around to see discussions about the family tree projects that come home in elementary school, but it's pretty fraught. It's a pretty fraught topic for families with adoptees or foster children or for donor-conceived families. Even families with same-sex parents can feel uncomfortable because of the sort of rigid framework being offered. And as an NPE, I haven't done my own tree. I haven't done any online trees. I don't think I've even written it down, like with a pencil. So much because of my NPE experience. But for the first time, after talking with Cairelle, I feel excited about the possibility of weaving these different people into my understanding of ancestry. So we'll see. We'll see if I finally get around to looking at all my matches and figuring something out. I don't know. It still feels very intimidating. If you want to read The Magic in Your Genes, head over to Amazon. You can find a link on my website, everythingsrelativepodcast.com, which is where you can find other ways to support this project, like listening to more episodes, checking out the merch store, sending me a note to ask me a question or let me know how you're feeling about things. And, oh yeah, okay, speaking of notes, it's time for the review of the week. This review comes to us from Apple Podcasts and was written May 28th, quite recently. And it says, this is maybe my favorite review of all time. That's not what it says. It says, okay, but as an NPE, who else would listen? I don't need this edgy chick lit attitude. Grow up. 2 stars. Okay. Well, there you have it, folks. Someone finally saying what I imagine you've all been thinking. So it just goes to show you, I don't just want good reviews. Even a truthful review like this can get review of the week. Do you agree with this person? Do you disagree? You can let me know by writing a review. Will I grow up? Do I have a chick lit attitude? Come back next week to find out. In the meantime, water your plants, pick up the kids. Don't forget to fax in those client-submitted claims to your insurance company. Womp, womp. That's what I have to do today. I'm Eve Sturgis. This is Everything's Relative. Bye-bye.
Everything's Relative with Eve Sturgis is produced by Eve Sturgis and Kaylin Egan and edited by Joy Rumel. Logo designed by Ivy McNally, and music is used with permission from Goodbye the Band. Eve is a licensed psychotherapist, but her podcast episodes are not therapy sessions.